What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be taking a deep look at the Sniper Decoy gadget in Battlefield 6. This is one of the recon gadgets, and it turns out in the game's current state, this is quite broken. It's not working as intended, and while I was going to write it off entirely because it wasn't working as intended, I figured out exactly what's going on here, why it's not working properly, and how you can really take advantage of this in its current state if you're sniping. So let's dive into the basics, and the description for this says that it's a dummy designed to draw enemies' attention while you fire from a safer location. Taking up a position near a friendly sniper decoy will hide your scope glint with its own. This also replicates the stance of the owner when it's placed, so if you're prone and place it, it will be prone. If you're crouched, it'll be crouched. If you're standing, it'll be standing. And when you place it, it will be immediately spotted, marking its position in world and on the enemy's minimap. Now, I would say the primary draw to this is the fact that it's meant to replace your glint with its own if you're standing near it and aiming down sight. And this is actually something I overlooked when making my full glint breakdown video, so if you guys have missed that, I definitely recommend checking that out. I cover all the ins and outs of scope glint, how it works, the ranges on it, how different optics impact glint or different weapon types. So you definitely don't want to miss that one. But with this, when I went to revisit it and do some testing, I found that it wasn't really working when it comes to hiding your scope glint. As you can see here, I can still see that enemy scope glint just fine, and they're standing right next to the dummy. However, as I continued to test, I noticed sometimes it was hiding the enemy's scope glint, and I wouldn't see any glint at all. But it was so inconsistent, and since you can't see if your glint is currently active or not as a sniper, it kind of defeats the entire purpose of this when you have no idea if it's actually hiding your glint or not in any given moment. And it seemed more often than not it wasn't hiding your glint. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it was totally useless though, because it may still draw the attention of enemy players toward that dummy first, because the dummy itself will still be projecting that scope glint outwards, and just the silhouette of that may also draw enemy attention. So let's look at that element first, before sharing what exactly is broken with these decoys and how you can actually take advantage of that to gain a whole lot of additional power as a sniper in this game. So with the decoy, this is what it looks like in game, and you'll see, just like with a player's scope glint, there won't be any scope glint within 20 meters. Whereas as you get to 20 meters and beyond, this is where the glint starts to appear, although it doesn't really start to get intense until you get to like 25 to 30 meters or so, and that's when it really becomes visible. However, unlike the scope glint that you see for a regular sniper, this does have a maximum range to it at roughly 100 meters. Beyond that range, there's no apparent sniper glint as far as I can tell with my testing, whereas against an enemy player, you will see that scope glint well beyond 100 meters, no problem. Now, as for the intensity of the glints, it's quite interesting. The dummy actually has a larger scope glint than a regular player would. So it is a little bit more eye-catching, but also, if you really know what you're looking for, you can tell that it's a dummy scope glint because it's larger and more intense than a regular scope glint. Now, outside of that, it does have very similar behaviors to standard scope glint. So the intensity of that glint will depend on how close that dummy is aiming to you. And with this, it does appear that it has a more narrow cone than a regular player's scope glint as well. So it's less likely that it's going to be aiming directly at you, especially when you account for elevation, because the dummies aren't looking up or down. So if you place a dummy and you're way up on a mountaintop, for instance, sure, the players still might see a little bit of scope glint coming out of that, but they're not going to see the really intense version of that because the dummy simply won't be looking right at their target. Also, just a little quick tip with placing the dummy, if you want to be extra precise with this, and you want to make sure that it's aiming as close as possible to your intended targets, the dummy itself is angled slightly to the right by about 5 degrees or so. So you actually don't want to be placing the dummy literally dead on straight at your target. You want to angle about 5 degrees to the left of where you want your dummy to actually be looking, and then that will maximize the chance that the enemies will see that more intense version of the glint. And with that out of the way, now let's get to the juicy bit of this. And this is what exactly is broken here when it comes to the dummy and its glint interaction. Why is it that sometimes your glint appears and other times it doesn't when standing near a dummy? Well, from what I can tell, the intended design of this is within a 7 to 7.5 meter radius of the dummy. I'm just going to call it 7 meters from here on out in the video, but it might be 7.5. Within that radius of a friendly dummy, if you aim down sight with a sniper, your scope glint is not meant to appear at all. That's how the dummy is meant to be used. However, as we established, that's not happening, at least not consistently. And from what I can tell, the issue here is it's not performing a check every time you aim down sight to see if you're within that radius of the dummy. And then if you are within the radius, you have no scope glint. If you aren't within that radius, you do have scope glint. Instead, the outer edge of that radius is acting as a trigger to toggle your scope glint on or off if you're aiming down sight. This means if you just do what most people do, and that is place the dummy down, stay within that 7-meter radius the entire time and aim down sight, well, you're always going to have Scope Glint. If, however, you leave that 7-meter radius, and then while aiming down sight, strafe into that 7-meter radius, this will toggle off your Scope Glint. And this means every time you aim down sight after that, you've got no Scope Glint. And you might be thinking, that's not that broken or exploitable. The issue here is that toggle only triggers when aiming down sight and crossing that 7-meter threshold. As a result, if you leave that 7-meter radius and you're not aiming down sight when you leave that radius, it's not toggling your Scope Glint back on. So this means in the game's current state, you can just use these dummies to turn off your Scope Glint, and then you can go wherever you want on the map and not have Scope Glint. So that is definitely broken and not the way that these dummies were intended to be used. I realize this is definitely going to result in people taking advantage of this. However, one saving grace with this is, like I said earlier, you never actually know if your Scope Glint is appearing or not for other players. There's no indicator on your screen letting you know that, yes, your Scope Glint is currently activated. And I decided against investigating any further than this to really figure out how to abuse this the best way possible. Like, I don't know what happens if you die and respawn. I don't know if you have to re-trigger this, and I decided against testing that. Now, why would I share this in the first place if it can be abused? Well, the primary reason here is I'm fairly new to creating content for Battlefield, and I have zero direct contacts to anybody at DICE. I have no contacts to developers, unlike with Call of Duty where I could just send a DM out, for instance. I can't do that with this game, so the best way to get something like this fixed is for it to spread in the community. And it's not like this is a complete game breaker or anything. This isn't the craziest bug out there, but it is something that people will absolutely take advantage of. I'm sure the devs will be able to get on top of this one very quickly. This one should be an extremely easy fix once the devs are aware of it. So I suspect it will be taken care of in the not too distant future. But until then, this is what's going on with those Sniper Decoys and why you might be getting frustrated with the fact that they're not behaving like their description states that they're behaving. Now, once I do get on top of this bug, I think these decoys are actually going to be great when they're working as intended, where you do have to be standing within 7 meters of them. And if you do so, then you don't have glint and they are giving off glint. I think that's actually a really cool gadget. And once they do get on top of that, I'll be sure to update the title of this. I'll just put like fixed or something in the title so you're aware of that. But there we go. That's going to wrap it up for today's video. And this is where I'm curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How are you feeling about the Sniper Decoy, both in its current state where it is bugged out and it can be used to just turn off your Scope Glint all the time, as well as if it were working as intended? Do you guys like the idea of a gadget like that, where if you are standing next to it, it will eliminate your Scope Glint while projecting its own? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.